Happy Saturday, Risers. Hope you all are safe and well. Saagar and I are back here in the studio after one of the most bizarre and frankly cataclysmic weeks in recent memory. Like many of you, we had to work from home for a few days this week because of the coronavirus outbreak, but we weren't going to let that stop us from bringing you interviews with some of our favorite people, some great thinkers on what is unfolding before our very eyes. We had Michael Brooks, Zed Jelani, Glenn Greenwald, and more who all joined us via Skype throughout the week. We also had interviews with the Progressive Senate candidate who's making waves in Colorado after he defeated incumbent Senator John Hickenlooper. Oh, he did not defeat him, but he did well against him in the caucuses. Still more primary to go there, but he's better positioned than we expected. And also the communications director for the Trump campaign came on the show to discuss how the campaign is rethinking its strategy amid the pandemic.
And obviously the big thorough line for the week, it was the spread of coronavirus and how our societies are adapting to a new socially distanced normal. And while we all began to work from home, the House and the Senate were working on legislation that was supposed to help average Americans who are about to feel the financial effects of the world's largest economy coming to a stop in a matter of weeks. However, a loophole in a bill meant that workers nationwide take care of themselves and that their families could end up leaving millions of workers without a safety net. We spoke with the Kentucky Democratic Congressman John Yarmuth about that loophole. Let's take a look at what he had to say. So, Congressman, you're saying this is a result of a glitch in the legislation and it wasn't negotiated? Because I've seen some other speculation from your colleagues that this was added kind of as a lobbyist egg into the legislation. Is that incorrect?
I really can't answer that question. I know that that was not what was intended by the caucus in the discussions that we had. And I was involved in a couple of discussions at the leadership level, but not in the negotiations. We fully intended for virtually everybody to be covered. So I have to assume either this is one of the demands that the administration made or it was just a glitch, but we'll have to find out in the next day.
John Yarmuth was my congressman when I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and I got to know him pretty well there. And we don't always agree on everything, but the thing that I always like about him is he's honest.
Yeah.
And then we're like, how did this happen? How did it happen that the House-passed bill left workers at companies with 500 or more employees, a massive proportion of the workforce, just left them out in the cold? How did this happen? He's basically like, I don't know. Don't know,
and
because
what?
It was all in leadership's hands. He didn't have anything to do with it.
And that's what's happening right now with the GOP bill. It was all written by leadership. It was all written and negotiated with Nancy Pelosi and Steve Mnuchin. Is that the actual Congress isn't having any real debates about these things. It's a complete disaster. Is that whenever we have these corporate Democrats and Republicans who are in charge of leadership in both parties, they control everything. They have the power. Especially in this situation, they have more power than they ever have. So we have to watch them like a hawk.
Absolutely. So we also had Intercept's Ryan Grimm, of course, great friend of our show, on the show Wednesday to talk about the Democratic primary. He called out both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden for not doing more to try to postpone the elections in Illinois, Arizona, and Florida that happened earlier this week, potentially exposing millions to coronavirus. Let's take a look.
Both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have not been taking leadership on this either. Joe Biden would rather send his elderly voters to the polls and risk their lives and the lives of their loved ones to drive a stake into the heart of Sanders because he knows he has momentum, and if he can finish him off right now, then he's the nominee. But Sanders too he's said, look, I leave it to the governors. It doesn't seem to make much sense, but he hasn't been firm in telling his people that they shouldn't vote or saying that the elections shouldn't go forward.
Ryan's point is well taken, but there's no question who the more egregious offender here was. Joe Biden's, his account was tweeting out misinformation about, listen, if you're asymptomatic, you have nothing to worry about, when we know that that's not true. And that story developed and got even worse, where Tom Perez and the DNC are now threatening states that if they're going to move their primaries, they might lose some of their delegates. So absolute abdication of any kind of moral responsibility or leadership in this moment.
Yeah, it really is. And you know what, though? I think you and Ryan have been big voices on this, which is telling Sanders that, look, it's probably over at this point. It's time to get to work, become the leader of the Democratic movement, make sure that you're fighting with Republicans over the interests of workers in the time of crisis in which people need bailouts. This is what you were born for. You might arguably be more effective than you are right now, than you ever could have been as president of the United States. And it's time to go. It's just time to work.
Yeah, a different time would require something different. If things were unfolding in a different way, I would fight for him to go all the way to the convention, like take it to the floor, get what you can on these platform committees, et cetera. But the fact is that the ball game is right now. The ballgame is not next
now.
January when someone's being inaugurated. I mean, things will still be important then as well. But you can shape the future of the country for years, decades, depending on the actions that are taken right now. So if he could grab a leadership position in terms of managing this crisis, I think that would be the best. I think he should do whatever he can to get in that position to be a real leader on what Democrats are doing, because they have no ideas.
Yeah.
They have no ideas. They have no vision for what they want the country to be like tomorrow, let alone coming out of this crisis. They really need him in this moment, whether they realize that or not.
Yeah, certainly. All right, finally, we wanted to highlight a conversation with Sara Nelson. She's the president of the Association of Flight Attendants. Talks about how the airline industry is handling the pandemic while still serving those who need to travel, as well as why she hopes the federal response to the crisis focus on workers, not on corporations.
Flight attendants have been on the front lines of the coronavirus for 2 months now. We've been dealing with the safety and health issues. We've been doing what we would normally do to try to stop the spread of a communicable disease by using our training. But this overtook us. It overtook our entire industry. It's overtaken our entire country. And so now we are in a real world of hurt here. And airline employees know very well what that means. We know what it means when the paychecks stop. So we've been through this before, and we're applying our experience from before to make sure that this doesn't look like any other bailout in the past. In fact, we're saying no bailouts. This has to be a worker relief program. So we are structuring it in this way.
Yeah, I mean, great point there, I think, from Sara, and it just shows the importance of what you and I are talking about, which is that if these corporate CEOs and all these other people get huge slush funds, $150 billion, then workers maybe need a slush fund too, or we see the same exact amount of consideration given to them in this time of crisis.
Yeah, Sara is such a strong voice for workers in this country. She's such a rock star, and she broke it down so effectively. And those are the kind of voices we want to have here on this show. Those are the kind of voices I hope someone is listening to in this town, because not only, I mean, she's the president of the Flight Attendants Union, she also was a flight attendant herself. So she knows really what it is like on the front lines, what her workers are dealing with, what their membership is dealing with, what they need to make sure they can survive, not only from a, just paycheck perspective, but also for those who are still on the planes flying, how to protect themselves so that they are not vectors and spreading further and themselves getting ill and potentially dying from this. So it was fantastic to have her voice. She's got such a clear perspective on all of this.
Absolutely. She's going to be back.
Absolutely. That does it for us. We'll be back later today with our recurring media segment, The Week That Was in Media Screw-Ups.
And tomorrow we're going to be back with another round of #RisingQs. We're going to see you guys then.